Hi everyone, let's find out the difference between pollination and fertilization. So, this topic is related to basically from reproduction of flowering plants. It is from reproduction of flowering plants. We can also say angiosperms. This is another name of flowering plants. So, if we see any structure of a flower, then we see that there are mainly four roles present in them. And these four roles are one which is known as calyx and it contains green colored sepal part. Small leaf like structure which is present on the base of the flower that is known as the sepal. The second one is the corolla. This one has brightly colored petals. And the main role of these brightly colored petals is basically to attract the insects or some other organisms to attract the plant, to attract them for the pollination. It is brightly colored petals. After this, the third one we have another one which is known as the androecium part. Androecium part is the male reproductive part of the flower. It is the male reproductive part. And the last one we have which is the gynoecium part, and this gynoecium one is related to the female reproductive structure. Now coming to the topic, what is pollination and what is fertilization? Firstly, the pollination is basically to transfer the pollen grains from the male part to the female part, that is known as the pollination. And fertilization, as we know that it is the fusion of male and female gamete, that is known as the fertilization. Now let's have a look on some major differences between them. So firstly we are talking about the pollination. So in case of the pollination, it is the first crucial step in sexual reproduction process of flowering plants. We can also term them as angiosperms. And it involves the transfer of pollen, basically the transfer of pollen grains from the male part to the female part. So this male part is anther. Anther has pollen grains in them, and later on this pollen grains has to be land on the stigma part. This stigma part is the female reproductive part on which basically the pollen grains land. After this, if we are talking about the fertilization, then fertilization is the process which only can be followed after a successful pollination. If pollination is not there, then fertilization cannot be there. So firstly, pollination will be there. After that, fertilization will follow this. Now, in case of fertilization, it involves the actual fusion of male and female gametes, and it results in the formation of a zygote, we can say, and this zygote eventually develops into a seed. After this, we are talking about more pollination. So in this one, the pollens basically contains the male gamete, and these male gametes are the sperm cells, and these are produced by the anther, which is the male part of the flower, and these pollen grains need to be transferred to the stigma. Stigma is the receptive part of the female flower, and basically this transfer is the process known as the pollination. Now for this pollination, some agents are needed, as these agents can be wind, these agents can be water, and some other insects as well, sometimes some animals as well, and birds as well. It depends on which type of pollination can be there. Pollination can be of many types on the basis of the agents they are using. After this, here we have, in case of fertilization, the male gametes are contained in the pollen. We know in pollen there are male gametes present, and they land on the stigma during pollination. The transfer is done, basically the pollination is done. After this, the female gamete are located inside the ovule, and it is found in the ovary. After this, fertilization occurs only when the sperm cell fuses with the female cell. So it occurs when a sperm cell from the pollen grain fuses with an egg cell which is present inside the ovule. So here again we can understand that after the pollination, fertilization will be there. Now the pollen from a flower fertilizes if the pollen from a flower fertilizes the same flower or another flower of the same plant. Remember, another flower of the same plant, then that is known as self pollination. And if again the pollen are transferred from one plant to another plant, then this type of pollination is known as cross pollination, and it is favored by the nature because it promotes genetic diversity. And it is most common type of pollination in nature. Why? Because it is promoting genetic diversity, and that's why here the chances of survival can be increased. After this, we are talking about the fertilization. So in this one, after the pollination, once the pollination is done, after that what will happen, the pollen grains will absorb some moisture and they will germinate to the stigma, and they will produce a pollen tube which will extend through the style part. Suppose this one is the stigma part, and here this one is the style part, and this one is the ovary part. So this one is a stigma, this one tube is style, and this one is the ovary part. Now inside this, here the pollen grains will germinate and they will move into the ovary part and the fertilization will be there. That's how the pollination, after the pollination, fertilization occurs. After this, we are talking about the pollination. So pollination is essential for seed production in many plants. And if we talk about the fertilization, so after the fertilization, here the fertilized egg will become zygote, which will further develop into the embryo. And the ovule eventually become a seed part, while the ovary, the surrounding part of that ovule, which is the ovary part, it will turn into the fruit. So the fruit that we eat, actually we are eating the ovary of a plant. After this, now let's talk about this thing that pollination promotes genetic diversity in case of cross pollination that we have covered, and it basically help plant to adapt according to the changing environment. That's why cross pollination is preferred in nature. After this, without pollination, there would be no fruit, seeds. So this one is the significance of pollination, that without pollination, there would be no fruit, there would be no seeds, there will be no offspring for many plant species. So these are some basic significance and importance of pollination, and it also include important crops for human food production. And if we talk about the significance of fertilization, so in this one the fertilization results in the formation of a zygote, which is the first stage of new plant development. After that only zygote will be converted into embryo, and then later on it will be converted into the seed. So these were some basic differences between pollination and the fertilization. Now let's have a look on some important images from this. Here we can see the parts of flower are shown. So in this one you can easily see here anther, this part in which pollen grains are formed, and filament on which the anther is located. These both are known as the stamen part. And if we talk about this one, here we have these green leafy like structure, small leaf like structure. These are sepals, and these brightly colored, these are the petal parts. So here you can see four rows are present. First one, second one, this one is third one roll, and finally this one fourth one roll. Now if I am talking about the stigma and style part, so these both parts are basically the pistil region, or we can say the female reproductive part. These are the female reproductive part. These are some parts of flower. After this, let's have a look on pollination as well as the fertilization. So here this first one is indicating pollination. In this one we can see firstly the pollen grains are produced in the anther part. After this, these pollens are transferred through the agent. Here the agent is honeybee, or you can say bee, which is known as the pollinator, and later on these pollens are, we can say, transferred to another flower. Now if this another flower is located on the same plant, then we will say it is self fertilization, and if we say that this is from another plant, then it will be the cross pollination, and the earlier one was the self pollination. After this, here we understood that pollination has done, that the pollens are transferred from one flower to another flower, and basically from one male part to another female part, that is to the stigma part. So this was about the pollination. After this we have fertilization. In case of fertilization, as you can see that pollen grains are present, and later on these, when they land on the stigma part, they will grow a pollen tube in the style region, and after this it will fertilize the egg cell. You can see here egg cell is present here. Now in these case, here double fertilization takes place. Basically here two gamete cells are present. Here you can see that two, it is indicated by two arrows, that basically two male gametes are present. In this one will fertilize with the egg, while the another one will fuse with the polar nuclei, we can say, and this will give rise to the endosperm and all. So basically what happens, because here two fertilization are occurring, that's why we use the term here double fertilization. So these were some basic differences between pollination and fertilization.